Well, hello and welcome to the Monocle Banking Podcast, brought to you by Monocle Solutions. I'm Michael Avery, and today it's a genuinely special one because this is episode 100, and I'm looking out at the top floor here of the Mark in the Monocle HQ, and thinking that when we started this podcast a few years ago, the idea was very simple, just to go deep and to really interrogate how banking and technology and regulation and all of those things are shaping the modern economy in South Africa and by extension our lives. And along the way, we've spoken to bankers, we've spoken to regulators, we've spoken to technologists, economists, founders, thinkers from all over the world, really. And there are a handful of voices that have really helped define the intellectual spine of this series. And one of those voices is my guest today, David Buckham, the CEO of Monocle Solutions. He's also, he probably won't like me saying this, but he's a polymath in the truest sense. He's a mathematician. He's a literary scholar by training, avid reader, reluctant entrepreneur by origin story, prolific author, trad climber, and all-around good guy and raconteur. And someone, David, it's great to have you back on for the 100th episode, who, when you sat down with me in those early days, really saw a vision for this podcast. And here we are, 100 episodes later, and anyone who's produced podcasts and done the daily grind, the weekly grind, getting the guests, I mean, that's no mean feat. So thank you very much for that early conversation that we had, I think back in 2001.
Michael, thank you so much. I mean, it's been quite a journey. If you think about it, 100 episodes is 48 network weeks. So it puts us back into 2003. Vision came late 2002. And I want to thank you on the show for hosting this amazing show, the Monocle Banking Podcast, which has got a life of its own. So it's part of Monocle, but it's also, you have editorial freedom, as you say, and you've produced and interviewed the most fascinating menagerie of, minds. And I think it's got a kind of thrust to it, and people go to it, and we see from the listenership, it's amazing. So thank you very much. We should celebrate this 100th episode with whiskey.
We need to, but we are recording this on a Wednesday morning with lots of coffee.
Yes.
And the world feeling, again, as we start a new year, a little bit dislocated and unanchored from its traditional moorings. And, we're talking kind of a year in from a very important election in the world's biggest economy. But this is not a geopolitical conversation. I actually want to go back to our first long-form conversation, which I think was 2001, 2002, just after COVID. And at the time, we sat down. I was first introduced to you and the Monocle story. And I think at that time, it was also the end of money. You had just finished writing. Mm-hmm. We spoke about Iceland and Basel and the psychology of bubbles. And today, if you look at the world, what feels more dangerous now? Is it maybe access to cheap credit or access to cheap intelligence on the internet?
The world is in the most fascinating geopolitical / financial economic situation. But what I was reflecting on is, and I think maybe this will be good for our next conversation, is what this says about us as human beings. The moment that we're in, the level of uncertainty and disconnect, where people interpret things so differently.
Now, let's talk more about the Monocle journey, because when we first spoke, since then you've grown materially, the UK, the Netherlands footprint, you've launched Monocle Tech, and really not just a consulting partner, but really an execution partner at the sharp edge of banking transformation. But it wasn't something that you had put on a vision board back in your 20s. Let's go back to the early days and how Monocle came into being.
Thank you, Michael. I mean, it starts with me not even wanting to go to university and go to the army and be a paramedic. And my father freaked out and sort of convinced me to go to university, but I didn't want to study business. So I studied a mathematics degree, and then I'd studied simultaneously an English degree. So I went on to do a master's in literature. So I was, roughly speaking, completely unemployable other than as a part-time lecturer at UCT, and I'd taken my time over my master's degree. So whilst, friends of mine from school were working at Investec, earning like 25,000 Rand per month, which seemed insane at the time, I was earning 500 Rand a month as a lecturer. And I took 4 years to do my master's, and I really enjoyed it. I had a motorcycle, and I had my life, and it was fun. And then I think my father had become a bit concerned about my lack of direction. I thought I was going to become a novelist. And I, in fact, wrote a novel, but unpublished. And I got a job through a connection as an assistant to a salesperson who was selling computer-based training into corporates in Cape Town. So these were the days before the internet, or just before the internet, where you had something called CBT, computer-based training.
Yeah.
And you would sell kind of administration software and then management in, say, a Santam or a Southern Life at the time, which was or Norwich Life at the time, both of which are insurance companies that no longer exist, would be able to train their staff on Microsoft products, and follow their progress.
Mm.
And also there was software then called a 4GL, fourth generation language, which would allow you to use object-oriented programming methodologies to create your own training. And I went from not wanting to be in business to just absolutely loving it. And my eyes were opened by how much you could do with some basic tools and some basic products and a good attitude. And I started making some money and making some big sales. And I bought myself an SLK. And I was cruising around Cape Town. I arrived at work at 10 in the morning, and I was selling computer-based training to corporates in Cape Town and Stellenbosch. And I had, all the big customers. I had BP. We were doing really interesting stuff, but it became somewhat unchallenging after 3 years of being in sales of software. And so I resigned, and I got an opportunity on behalf of a corporate here to go to Australia to do some basic searching for companies that they could acquire. And then I was exposed to the M&A world, and I started to study my CFA. Came back from Australia after about 6 months, and I was now unemployed and studying CFA and rock climbing. And then I got a job at SAS, which is an American software company, and my mind was then blown at statistical software, which I understood because of my maths background.
Yeah.
But they were dealing with banks. And when I understood, going into those customers, what their problems were, it lit a kind of, wow, the software can do amazing things. The salespeople don't understand banking or maths. The client is very frustrated because they're talking to a salesperson who doesn't understand.
What were the blind spots of the banks at the time?
Well, at the time, we're talking pre-2001, there had been the release of the 1996 amendment for market risk, which was really taking a far more mathematical approach to value at risk, which is this measurement of what the potential loss is with a 95 or 99% confidence level. So they hadn't yet implemented a change to Basel I's measurement of credit risk. And I then went ahead and read consultative paper 3, which was for the Basel II credit risk IRB approach. So I'm reading a document that's 450 pages long that hasn't been adopted by South Africa, nor may it be at the time, but it's mind-blowing because it's using Merton's insight, which he got the Nobel Prize for, and it's extremely detailed and mathematical. And I know that banks are going to face a major uphill battle.
Monte Carlo simulations and all of those.
Yeah, you'll need to do very complex mathematical methodologies, but on large volumes of data, and you'll have to write. So I saw a wave of complexity that would hit banks. I was at that stage, I had resigned from SAS, and I was working for PSG Investment Bank. And PSG Investment Bank, the one day I was working on Sunday, I was an equity derivatives trader. And we were basically a hedge fund. And we were using various methodologies to try and make money in the equity markets. And some that we were very disappointed with, like fundamental research, but others, like momentum trades, were working. So we were making kind of a 60% CAGR. And then I didn't really like the environment, and I saw all the executives arrive the one Sunday, and I was like, I'm not stupid. I don't want to be on the sinking ship. And I resigned. And they said, no, just hold on a second. Don't resign. I said, look, guys, I'm not going to say anything. Just let me go. And they said, no, wait, you'll get a package and we'll figure it out. But I could see the A2 banking crisis just going on. And I just didn't want to be on a sinking ship. So I resigned, and I was in Cape Town at the time, and I moved to Joburg, and I'd had some contact with SAS, and SAS had said, can you do some speeches for us at some conferences, and can you come to some customer meetings and interpret what the customer needs? There's this, people are talking about this thing called Basel II and funds transfer pricing. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah.
Match maturity funds transfer pricing. I said, yes, I just did a lecture on that. And so I moved to Joburg, moved in with my parents. I had run out of money because I had been unemployed for about a year, rock climbing.
And now in like your early 30s.
Early 30s, like 30.
Yeah.
Living with my parents in Dainfern. And I just started a company called Monocle Solutions, which we had offices, which was a tiny office that my dad rented to me for 2,000 Rand a month. And I remember saying, look, what we're going to do is I'm going to help SAS interpret client stuff because I've now read banking and done my CFA.
And you can be that bridge between the technology world and the banking world.
And you could see how the bridge would be required. That was the opportunity.
Yeah.
But it's not so easy to just walk into a bank.
No.
People don't really take calls. So within about 6 months, I had run out of the initial investment my father had given me, which was like 100,000 Rand loan. And I was down to like 20,000 Rand. And I remember phoning him and saying, and my father's a very successful entrepreneur and a very hardcore man. So he said, I phoned him and I said, Dad, you know what? This thing isn't really working out. I'm really, really worried. I've phoned 100 people. I've got a list and I've only had 8 responses and 1 possibility. And And he said, no, David, I've got an idea for you. So why don't you get a lady in the back? We've got an industrial kitchen in the back of that building and she can make sandwiches and then you can sell them door to door in Randburg. So I was like extremely offended. And, I've got 4 degrees, very well read. I'm a writer, I'm a journalist. So it's like it took quite a lot for me to recover from that moment. I didn't speak to him for some period of time, although I was also staying in his house. But it did give me the kick up the butt that I needed. And then what happens is if you just hang in there, and I got a call. I had created a training course called How to Use Monte Carlo Simulation in measuring risk in a investment banking deal. And I built these little methodologies that used a mix of mathematics and Excel. And I started getting calls and I started getting training. And then I got a call from SAS to speak to one of the big banks about match maturity funds transfer pricing. And then I got a call from another big bank who wanted me to do a review of their models and whether they were Basel II appropriate. And then I got a call I had gone on some training during my time at SAS, and I got a call from some of the friends that I met on the training from Denmark. And I flew to Denmark, and they said they have opportunities, and they liked the way that I could speak bank.
Yeah.
And before I knew it, I had 2 big South African Basel II clients and a funds transfer pricing client. And I'm now 4 people. So I'm employing Willie Earlers, who's our chief operating officer.
Was one of the first employees.
Yeah. So I employed him in August 2005. So I had spent 3 years. Maybe he was number 10 or 12, but it had been like pretty lonely work.
Yeah.
And then I got Yako towards the end of that year. But really we were running between the banks. And then I got a call at the end of 2005. So this guy, Rob, in SAS Denmark, had taken a proposal I'd written, which was the way I wanted to sell was that we would do a 5-day analysis at an executive level. And then I'd write up the report and you can carry on, Mr. Client, or not. But after that, there'd be a 6-week exercise. So it created this easy to buy scheme and you get more and more committed as a customer.
Yeah.
And then at the end, you could buy some software, sure. But you need to go through this process.
The training and
the interpretation and the mapping and because people use different linguistics. But Basel being written by Swiss people, it wasn't really universal, and there is no universal plug for banking. So could I go to Iceland over the Christmas period, just before Christmas, he sold to Landsbanking.
Wow. And this is 2005.
2005, December
A
2005.
couple of years before the global financial crisis. And as we know, the Icelandic banks were taking pretty big bets at that stage.
They were sending an S600 to the airport to pick me up, putting me up in a 5-star hotel. I was there for a week, and someone tried to buy my company. The guy said, we're Vikings, we're buying everything. And it's just like, no. But yeah, we did a lot of work with them, and we witnessed through them and through other methodologies. Pretty soon we got Barclays as a client in London. We were on their Basel II program.
So by this stage, just to
Yeah.
pause you there, you've now realized that, right, I'm not going to have to sell sandwiches for the rest of my life.
Yes.
And actually, you're proving the concept to yourself, and the momentum is now rolling, and you've realized, hey, I've actually got something here.
100%. I mean, I had created a methodology to interpret Basel, and I'd mapped it in a massive Excel spreadsheet to every single one of the rules, so that should a regulator want to know what we were doing about Basel, and this was what I was selling to banks, is I have the blueprint and I've done the work.
Yeah.
That Excel spreadsheet, I mean, it was amazing. We got work at Barclays Bank. We were helping with their global rollout of Basel. We got work in Iceland. We got work in Denmark. We got work in Singapore.
Wow.
We got work that was more interesting non-Basel project. We got work in Hong Kong at 2 different banks.
But a lot of global traction versus...
Yeah, we were not doing much in South Africa. We were like much more interested in flying around the world and having a jaw and implementing Basel. One of our customers leaked the spreadsheet. And we noticed some of the big 4 firms, because I had put errors in the spreadsheet on purpose. And it was, especially in the Far East, it just was propagated. But by then, I couldn't deal with the demand either.
IP is a very fluid concept in the Far East.
Yeah, it was quite disappointing at first, but we had some stories. So we had Malaysia, we had 2 banks. We had Hong Kong, we had 2 banks. We had a Singapore bank. We had a bank in Denmark, which unfortunately failed. Our Hong Kong bank also almost failed because they were selling on Lehman mini bonds. So imagine 30 men and women flying around the world between 2005 and late 2008, when I get a call from the head of credit from Landsbanking, there's been a national disaster.
Yeah.
And I thought a volcano had gone off, but actually their banking system failed.
Yeah.
And
it was a metaphorical volcano of the global financial system.
Yes, yeah, it was. And it taught me a great lesson, Michael, which was that I had seen lots of signs that I should not go along with this narrative anymore.
Yeah.
And there were spreadsheets and there were presentations that I put together which were altered by the client to the management. And I saw this repeatedly and thought, well, I'm doing my job. But I became, after the global financial crisis, far more self-critical and far more determined to never let that happen again, to never be on the wrong side. We did nothing illegal, but we could have been more vocal and less about going along for the ride and more about actually taking a stand.
Yeah.
So
and letting those values drive your decision making ultimately, because when a crisis like that happens, I mean, you emerge so much stronger if you've been a values-based voice rather than going along for the ride. But it's interesting because the last time we spoke, you spoke about that international story being largely project-led. And since then, Monocle has meaningfully expanded, but more intentionally, I would think, in the UK and the Netherlands. You've built out presence in Amsterdam and the Netherlands as a European base. What changed in terms of the approaches, and how did that lesson inform this kind of international expansion phase 2?
Well, it was, yes, that's a great question. We came back to South Africa kind of with our tails between our legs. What amazed us at first was that the fact that South Africans didn't know what the global financial crisis was. They hadn't experienced it because they didn't sell credit default swaps and CDOs. They didn't have collateralized debt obligations. And they also were in the RAND system.
Yeah.
And there was some like markets people who knew how bad it was, but there wasn't really a sense of how bad it was. And South Africa at that time was doing pretty well. Our problem was that we had been used to knocking on doors and getting through on an international consulting basis. But in South Africa, we had to build up our credibility. So we started getting contracts with South African banks to do very much change projects. And it took, 2012 was probably our worst year, which was transferring from international clients to South African clients. And then we struggled. And around about 2014, 2015, I had a trip, an executive trip with Willie and Jaco and team up a mountain. We slept in a cave and looked at the stars and carried a couple of bottles of whiskeys. And we were discussing, because I used to give everyone 5-year awards, which is, it's amazing. You've been at Monocle for 5 years. And Monocle is now at this stage 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old. And what are we going to get for 10 years? And I'm lying on a rock, staring at the stars, going, why not a sabbatical? And as the words left my mouth, it was like, oh my God, no, this is a bad idea, because this core team are going to all want a sabbatical. So I said, I go first, and then each person, one person per year. And I went on sabbatical and stayed in Europe and did Ironman events for 3-4 months. And I really did detach myself from the organization. And it was the single best thing I've ever done. I came back and the thing was running itself. Willie and Jaco were running the business, and we had grown and we were making more profit.
Was that a difficult thing for you to realize? Because I think often when I chat to founders, entrepreneurs and founder-led businesses, some of the hardest decisions are often when to let go, because it's your baby. You know, you put your blood, sweat and tears in this. Or for you, was it more a realization that the time is just right for me to take a step back and allow Jaco and Willie to run with the ball?
I think it was a combination of things. The one problem was that I was reading every document. Before my sabbatical, I was reading and signing off every single document. So it was restricting our growth.
Slowing you down, decision-making.
Yeah. It was also
bottlenecked.
driving me insane. But the other thing the aspect was that the people that I had employed that worked with me had been molded in the fire and brimstone of the global financial crisis, flying around the world and working all night. And so they are really a strong team. I mean, Willie and Jaco, I trust completely. So it was far easier to let go with them. It wasn't like a normal, ordinary, it's a unique story because it's not a normal, ordinary working environment.
Yeah.
There's no questions of me taking unilateral decisions because I would never do that. So it's not a normal organization in that sense. So I have the privilege of being called the CEO, but I'm not sure that I match any of the normal criteria. And then what happened is we just took off. We just exploded from 30 people in 2014 to 80, 90 people. And then 100 people, and it was just, we were in all the banks, and we were now re-looking at, we opened up our UK office again, which had been shut down.
Yeah.
And we opened up.
Was that a pull from clients over there, or a deliberate push strategy maybe to be counter-cyclical to the South African growth narrative?
Well, at that time, I'm not sure if you remember, but there was a great exodus of talent. And we thought, well, if the talent is flying overseas, maybe we can use our South African connections to get people over there who want to go anyway to the UK, and we'll provide them with a stable working environment, and we'll be able to issue intercompany visas, and it will make us more attractive in South Africa. But it will also, the market is pretty small for banking in South Africa. So there's the big four, and there's a bunch of international consulting firms, and there's local consulting firms all fighting for the same work.
Yeah.
So overseas it's the same, but there's 100 times more.
I've got to ask you on that point. Kenny Fieler, now at ABSA, has recently said, no, too many consultants in the banks. I mean, has it just become a bit of a feeding frenzy and where consultants, without being disparaging to maybe competitors, but there's not real value being added?
Yes, it depends. If you look at the definition of consulting, would be anyone who's non-permanent, right? It's a very broad definition. Now, there's a lot of people that are even ex-bank employees that just sort of reintegrate into the customer, but now that they're a consultant, but
Yeah.
they're really doing a desk job, which is the same as it's what we call business as usual. It's very different to someone who's implementing a change project or is a critical resource with cloud skills
Yeah.
that has Amazon skills or has Microsoft skills that you can't get anywhere else, that you have to buy.
COBOL.
Yeah, or you've got an old COBOL programmer that's critical. So I get where he's coming from. You've got a big drag and you've got a lot of people feeding off the system. But there's a lot of good work being done by a lot of companies.
Mhm.
So mostly he's sending a message that where you can, division heads, please be more lean. And we would agree with that.
Mm.
It should be like that.
Mm.
I mean, ABSA is a fantastic bank and they've done very well. And they've been through, in the course of my career, they've been married to Barclays, they've been divorced from, they've had a rough ride. And I think
But
their
just
branding is
lately,
amazing.
I mean, they do look like they're on the up. They've made some
Definitely.
pretty good hires from Standard Bank, in
Yes.
particular in the corporate investment banking division. I'm liking what I'm seeing at ABSA.
Myself, driving to work today, the Champagne Africa style, I like it. It's a great African brand.
Now, let's move now to Monocle Tech, because I found that
Yeah.
interesting, because at the heart, and as we've just heard of the Monocle story, was a tech, kind of story at the end of the day, tech and regulation. And you've now expanded that with Monocle Tech officially in the software, data, architect, all of that. So I think you can now really be a far more comprehensive solutions provider. Just take me through the Monocle Tech story, because it's very Monocle: ownership, deliverables, managed services, all of that.
It's a great story, Michael. It's the vision of one of our top guys, Jan, and he and Mark, who we employed from the banking environment. What's happened, it's so interesting, is that banks were previously very paranoid about their data. So they would keep their data in servers on site, and then they would have off-site recovery installations, very expensive, like physical off-site installation, complete, like there was a missile hit the building, they'd have everything still up and running. So that was their view a few years ago, like 10 years ago. What happened with cloud services, with Amazon and Microsoft providing, not just Amazon and Microsoft, but Google providing cloud services, Amazon Web Services, for example. So they would come to the head of IT for a bank and go, guys and girls, look, you're spending XYZ on all this hard infrastructure.
Yeah.
Why don't we take all your data and put it into our server farms, the cloud, and we'll have a relationship with you where we have certain guarantees in place, etc. And reluctantly, at first, banks moved across. So now there's about 3 or 4 massive companies the tech companies, that are more and more convincing large banks and large organizations to keep not only their data, but all of their software as a service, all their software and all their calculations in the cloud. Now, to do that is to have knowledge of the calculations, have knowledge of the data types and the data formats, and have knowledge of the sources of data in the business, but also of how the cloud works. And that's a rare thing. So we saw that as a huge opportunity, and these two amazing guys kicked off that at Monocle, and that has now grown exponentially.
As a business strategic decision, and I know the Reserve Bank had as the flavor of its year third-party risk last year, and given what we're seeing about the world order and the weaponization of tariffs and the weaponization of supply chains and leaning in on companies by politicians to do their bidding, how real is a potential risk here for our banking system of having said to the hyperscalers, and there's a handful of them, here, Mr. Hyperscaler, have my data, we'll use the software. This is a very important choke point now if someone were to lean on these hyperscalers to coerce them into do their bidding.
No, 100%. I mean, we host, as you know, an annual banking conference in the middle of the year. And after the conference, we usually host a dinner at Marble with 40 people and CEOs of banks. And one of the CEO of one of the banks in South Africa, which are won't mention the name of the bank or his name. We were having a whiskey outside, and he called them the seven horsemen, and said that we live in a world order where there are seven companies that run the world, and forget about nationality, or forget about international law, and forget about the dependency that we have, for example, on a Microsoft or an Nvidia or Amazon, especially I would say also with the AI revolution that's happening, there's a concentration of risk, and these companies are supranational. Their value system, like an Apple, is not national, it's supranational. So I definitely think we live in a new world order where third-party risk is, I would say, cyber risk and third-party risk are banks' main risks, and government intervention. Definitely government intervention would be, those three are the big risks.
Yeah.
From okay, so I'm going to be a bit show-offy, but I'm very proud of Monocle. We've grown tremendously. We're somewhere between 300 and 400 people right now, but it's growing. In Europe, we've gained a number of customers. We have GSIBs as customers. We have a European foothold and a British foothold, and we're getting work all over the place in really interesting projects. We have an AI offering. We have tech offering. We have cloud services. We have all kinds of interesting projects, like we're helping global markets do research on metals. Stuff goes on in this organization that blows my mind. Really, Michael, it's crazy.
It blows my mind, because if you rewind back to your origin story, reluctant entrepreneur in 2002, wanting to be, the academic in Cape Town, and then you show him David Buckham, Monocle of today, from that period, offices on high Santon towers overlooking big banks, deep capability stack, manifesting all of this change, growing. What would he not believe if you were to show that Monocle to early David back in the 2000s? And what would he recognize instant?
I'll be honest with you, and that's why I often decline to speak at entrepreneurial conferences, because I never had this desire to be wealthy or to run a large company, or, I just wanted to do something interesting that was intellectually stimulating and cutting edge with my life. I wanted to do something cool with my brain. That was my main desire. And I'd had a little bit of a taste of business and sales, and the challenge of making sales into an organization of a complex nature that was a meeting point between business, mathematics, and finance, and having an execution where you could be proud of an execution, like a CEO of a new bank saying to me at the inception of their new bank, if it weren't for you, we wouldn't be a bank right now.
Yeah,
was one of my
hugely gratifying,
proudest moments. So that was what I was seeking. The fact that we've grown so much and that it's deep stack of capability is making me very proud. And the way that we compete, I think, is not in an aggressive way. The way we do business is not aggressive. We are a group of nice people that are kind and that have empathy. So I'm very proud of that. My previous self would not have believed it. I think he would have probably said, I need to go rock climbing and rethink this.
Speaking of rock climbing,
yes,
I mean, it's an interesting metaphor for business in a number of ways, because I think, and I've been rock climbing with you once in the Cedarburg, and I had a whole newfound appreciation for trad climbing, because I always had in my head this idea of people who are inherently risk takers and they just don't care for their own safety. And yes, I think there is risk in rock climbing, but actually it's about calculated risk and understanding the risk, looking at the face, looking at the mountain, devising a strategy to get from point A and point B up. And if maybe you can't go up one route, then you come back down and you replot. What would you say are the biggest lessons that you've taken from climbing into business? What has it taught you about growing a business?
It's such a good question. So with rock climbing, specifically trad climbing, you have what's called a rack. So it will consist of camming devices, nuts, which are hexes. These are spring-loaded camming devices. These are things that you can put into the rock that will hold you if you fall, but that you take out of the rock and you leave no trace. So it's not as safe as clipping a bolt, which is a permanent mark on the rock.
Yeah.
So there's something about being able to do this with a set of tools in a sustainable way because you're not damaging the rock. And then also it's you and a partner or partners. You can't do it alone unless you're soloing, then you have no rack. And, that's a different thing. If you're with a partner, it's about working together and solving a problem, a complex problem sometimes.
Yeah.
And also on top of it, you've got this fear that you have to overcome because it is unnatural to be in a vertical landscape and it's sometimes overwhelming. So it's a perfect metaphor for business because it's much easier to take an easier path, purely professional path, and to follow a set of well-heeled paths. And we have a group of people at Monocle that are professionals, but that have chosen a much more involving, a much more challenging, and a much more, in my view, rewarding landscape, a vertical landscape.
Yeah, it really is. And I think when I experienced it, I really had that profound aha type of moment where you realize how this can be so addictive because it becomes so rewarding once you solve a particular challenge. But when you're on the side of the mountain, your legs shaking and you can't move and people are laughing.
Yes.
It's an altogether different
I remember
different high.
that time with you very well. And I don't know if you recall, Michael, you had to submit a column
A column.
to Business Day,
Yeah.
and you went off at high pace in your car through very rough landscape and came back. And then you climbed sort of, let's go. And it was just like every ounce of you went into that climb. It
Yeah.
was quite something
Yeah,
to see.
and thank you for opening that world up to me. I've just got to ask you just a last question. If you look back on the Monocle story, a fantastic story, but certainly nowhere near from being done. You've got this graduate program. You're at all the universities. I think skills is obviously a big focus for you. And attracting the right talent. I think it can be a constraint in the South African economy. So, where do you see yourself in the next 20 years? And in terms of the culture, what would you say defines the culture inside Monocle?
Well, I think from a culture perspective, we're very determined to make the experience of working at Monocle the best experience that you can possibly have. So there's clubs and there's sporting clubs. There's over 30 or 40 different clubs, paddle clubs and action cricket clubs. And, I do motor racing, kart racing clubs and climbing clubs, a climbing gym. And there's running clubs and cultural clubs and gaming clubs. And we also have master classes. So we focus a lot on the interaction with ourselves, between ourselves, and the executive team's going on a very high mountain hike next month. So it's just the fun continues.
Yeah.
And the growth we see in South Africa will be not only in our traditional zones, but Monocle Tech could easily move out of banking into a broader, everyone wants to be in the cloud, not just banks.
Yeah.
And then in the UK and Ireland and Europe, we're seeing enormous opportunity. So also there's much more acceptance of remote work. So there's absolutely no reason why we can't deliver projects sitting here, but in the UK. And if you take all of those factors together, that we have a footprint in the UK, we have a footprint in Europe, we also have really done well in the insurance industry recently, and asset management, and global markets. And the Basel story continues, and there's great disruption to the interface with the US and Europe, which creates opportunity for us. I think we're incredibly well positioned to grow over the next 5 to 10 years into sort of a considerable international consulting brand. And if I may say, Michael, how many companies can you think of that are South African that are truly international brands? So if you take SAB,
Very few.
Richemont.
Yeah. Maybe a couple of telcos.
There's not so many. So, and in the services space, none.
Yeah.
So that is a very big goal of ours, to achieve that, to be an international brand in the services space.
And David, knowing you, I certainly wouldn't bet against that. Always a privilege, David. Thank you very much. From a reluctant entrepreneur, who would have thought it back in the early 2000s, selling nothing more than your own expertise, to leading a an already global firm operating across South Africa, the UK, and Europe, helping banks wrestle with risk and regulation and data and technology. I think your story also mirrors the very modern evolution of finance itself. It's messy, it's human, occasionally a bit reckless, but full of possibility. And as banking hurtles towards a future shaped by things like open finance, we've got tokenization, AI. I think the temptation is always going to be to believe that the models can replace responsibility and efficiency can replace some of the meaning that we derive from work. But today's conversation, I think, is a great reminder that tech should amplify that human judgment and certainly not absolve it, and the relationships as well. So to our listeners as well, thank you for being part of this journey. Episode 100. I mean, it's as much yours as it is ours. And if you've been with us, thank you to the listeners from the early days. Or if this is your first listen, we're grateful for your time, and be sure to tune in because we're going to bring you more conversations from the coalface of banking. This has been the Monocle Banking Podcast, proudly brought to you by Monocle Solutions. I'm Michael Avery. Until next time.